Hello YouTube land, my name is Mike Rieger and I hold a PhD in molecular cell biology. My research experience is primarily in neuroscience, genetics, and molecular biology, but I have been a hobby student of languages and phonology and phonetics now for most of my adult life. I recently started taking a course in ancient Greek through the Ancient Language Institute, or ALI. I appreciate their sort of living language approach to ancient Greek. So I'm starting some videos here to kind of document my progress. The goal is lofty. I would like to become a fluent or very proficient speaker of Koine Greek, which may mean a lot of things, TBD. My hobby interests in the area of sort of ancient language and ancient history studies surround religious development in the Eastern Mediterranean, early Judeo-Christianity, stuff like that. Although I am myself an atheist, I find religious development to be fascinating, and fortunately I do not come from religious trauma in my upbringing. In this video, I wanted to document the pronunciation style for Koine Greek that I'm choosing to use in videos going forward. Specifically, I'm trying to imitate what might be a plausible, high register, somewhat archaicizing style that might have been used in Greco-Roman Egypt, in Alexandria, something in the early Koine period, last century BC, early first century, or mid first century AD, something like that. To do that, I'm taking a cue from the excellent body of work that Ranieri has put out on this subject, and using a sort of archaicizing variant of the Lucian pronunciation scheme. To describe that, I'm going to walk through in this video his primary guide, which as far as I can see was revised in 2021. I don't know if there's an updated revision. To some degree, I am choosing a convention for myself based on aesthetics that is probably unsurprising to most students of classical languages. Any such reconstruction is going to involve some uncertainties, anachronisms, artificialities. So I get that disclaimer right out of the way. Some of that will be on the part of the research that informs the reconstruction itself. Some of that is just on my part as a fallible human, especially as a beginner student who has never studied this language before, certainly not formally. As a hobby student of phonology, though, I do find the endeavor exciting. One of my party tricks is that I tend to be pretty good at pronouncing things just in general and mimicking sound, so we'll see how I do. I will say that I don't think, pedagogically speaking, that it is particularly important to approach some sort of ideal pronunciation for any kind of proficiency in a language. Plenty of people walk around being extremely fluent and extremely proficient in languages while still holding an accent from their native language. However, it is sort of part of my goal as a hobbyist, even where I wouldn't say prescriptively that it should be anyone's goal or the goal of the enterprise of teaching language per se. So with that, I'd like to go straight to the primary document on Lucian pronunciation and walk through it in long form video that, aside the script that I wrote for this intro, will be just me kind of winging it and walking through it. And I'd like to point out ways that I've adopted the conventions that are presented in the document, ways that I've archaicized based upon sort of recommendations that are given in the document, and why I'm kind of making those decisions. So feel free to leave your thoughts and comments below and tell me how I'm doing. I will try to post updated videos on readings, who knows what, maybe just me talking to the camera once I have enough vocabulary and feel the gumption to do so. So yeah, let's dive in. Okay, so Ancient Greek Pronunciation Guide, a discourse on the inherent challenges of establishing a single Ancient Greek pronunciation system. That is quite a title, with detailed explanation of Lucian pronunciation of Ancient Greek. So I am going to go straight to the meat of this. I have read all of this, and it brings up a lot of points that I tend to be aligned with. So I'm going to go straight to the meat, which is the recommendations for the standard of Lucian pronunciation. And I think that starts with the vowels. So where is that? There we go. Okay, so let's go right in. most Lucian pronunciation vowel qualities are the same as in modern Greek. And so in this case, this is all IPA, so I'm very familiar with IPA, so I'm happy to now use it. And I love to see a text in which all of the guides are given in IPA. That makes it so much more precise and so much easier to go through. So yeah, most Lucian pronunciation vowel qualities are the same as in modern Greek. So for each of these letters, we're given the vowel quality. So for alpha, I'll use English pronunciations of these letters for right now. Alpha, the IPA is given as the back vowel A. The example word, which is this word arti, I don't know what that word means. Listen, I'm a beginner. Arti. And then the next is epsilon. And epsilon is given this sort of advanced tongue root or advanced version of the mid vowel, near high mid vowel e. So this would be e versus e, advanced tongue root. So the example is the verb to have here, which is I have, which is echo. One thing you'll notice about me is that I am using aspirated voiceless stops. Echo. There are reasons for this. As far as I can tell, in Greco-Roman Egypt, the aspirated voiceless stops did not spirantize for quite a while. So even where the voiced stops spirantized, the aspirated voiceless stops stayed plosives, and did not become fricatives as they may have done elsewhere in the Greco-Roman world. So echo. And then for iota, he is putting E, the short vowel E, the high front vowel E, isos. And then for the omicron, he is using an advanced tongue root back vowel O, mid back vowel O, rounded mid back vowel. And I have a hard time hearing a distinction between this and with a retracted tongue root. They sound very similar to me. So I have a hard time distinguishing that. So this word is opsis. Ancient Greek also has the front high rounded vowel U, as in modern French. Mandarin Chinese, many languages have this vowel. U, lukos. I find myself in my own reading and pronunciation to slightly unround this and approach something like an E. Certainly that's how we got there in modern Greek, because in modern Greek this is pronounced E, so this would be pronounced likos. But somewhere in between, I think I probably unround it a little bit more often than I should, but I try to round it. I have some ability in French. I'm not entirely, and Mandarin Chinese for that matter, so I'm not entirely unfamiliar with an U. I don't have it in my native language, English, of course. Lucian pronunciation retains phonemic distinction between short and long vowels. I am maintaining that in my own convention. There are many reasons to believe, as far as I can read about it, that in the Koine period, certainly in Egypt, the phonemic vowel length distinction had collapsed. Maybe in popular speech, I would assume a high register would maintain it. But the other reason why I'd like to keep phonemic vowel length in my own speech and recitation is because as a learner, it makes things a lot easier. Phonemic vowel length as a learner means that, let me make sure I'm still recording. Great. Phonemic vowel length as a learner means that it is easy to learn grammar and how to spell things, because so much of the classical Greek grammar is based on the differences in syllable length, and so I like that. One of the most annoying things, and I've seen some of Luke's videos where he shares this frustration, is that many texts in ancient Greek do not macronize the long a, e, and u, which make it annoying. Although for long a, in many cases for like feminine nouns of the first declension, it's pretty easy to guess when you'll see that. However, in the cases of e and u, where the phonemic vowel length is just part and parcel of the root word itself, that's real hard. So I often end up having to go to Wiktionary and like go to other sources and just like figure it out, and then overlay on my own text with like mechanical pencil where the long vowels are, which is very frustrating. But here they are. So they're all just longer versions of the short vowels. So we have a, e, and then epsilon iota and long iota are both pronounced e. This is of course true in modern Greek. And this is the case in the Koine period, at least for many or most speakers, as far as I understand. So we have agan, agan. One thing you'll notice is that I do love my velar fricative. Agan, ete, ete, ipon, ipon, apokrinete, apokrinete. And then we have long o, come, come. The long udamos, udamos, udamos. And long diknumi, diknumi, diknumi. And then he notes long epsilon iota e and long iota e have merged completely in standard Lucian. And then he notes the following. Epsilon iota before vowels likely retain a more open quality for at least some speakers until the early Roman Empire. We can tell this from the frequencies of the spellings Alexandria and Alexandria. And it seems to be used alternatively. I had been adopting the convention of opening slightly the epsilon iota to a in front of a vowel. And this is something I've seen before, and I have done that. I don't know if that's exactly not particularly kosher for the period and place and time where I'm going, but it is what I'm doing so far. I may or may not always do that consistently, so let's see how consistent I can maintain that convention. This is a little aside about phonemic vowel length in other classical languages, etc., etc., etc. A fun fact, he brings up a classical Hebrew had phonemic vowel length at least 0.1 in its history, etc., etc., etc. One thing that's interesting about vowel length in Hebrew is that the vowels for Hebrew, of course, Hebrew texts, biblical Hebrew texts, are older than the vowel pointings that we have. And the vowel pointings that we have actually come from the Middle Ages, because the Masoretic scribes, the vowel pointing that has survived to us comes from the Middle Ages, comes from like the 8th, 9th, 10th century. And in Tiberian, in the Masoretic tradition, those vowels, vowel length is like quasi-phonemic, but most of the time it's just conditioned based upon stress. There are like extra long syllables, short syllables, and long syllables, and it just depends on whether or not a syllable is open and like whether it's stressed, whether or not it's long. Like there's a lot of things that go into that. Some vowels are kind of always long. Some vowels are short some of the time. Most vowels are just differentiated by quality. Classical Arabic, of course, does have phonemic vowel length. Funnily enough, so I'm a proficient speaker, although I wouldn't say perfectly fluent, in Levantine Arabic. And in Levantine Arabic, with probably the exception of the Syrian dialects, actually it seems that phonemic vowel length is on the way out in general, or at least partially in general. When stress in a word moves off of the long vowel to another syllable that has a long vowel, or just moves off the long vowel at all, that long vowel will shorten. So an example of this is the Arabic word sayyara, which means car. And when you add the suffix at to the end to make sayyarat, typically only the final syllable will be pronounced long. So it's not sayyarat, but it's sayyarat. The exception to this being Syrian speakers that typically retain long vowels outside of stress position, so they'll say something more like sayyarat, sayyarat, which gives them sort of a more melodic quality to those dialects. So it is something that is easy to lose once it no longer, or once it might be distinguishable by quality or something else that can distinguish meaning. So then he goes into the importance of phonemic vowel length, etc., etc. Again, as a learner, I think for me personally, I find a lot of utility in maintaining phonemic vowel length, just to like learn vocabulary, learn how to spell things, with the exception of the collapse of iota and epsilon iota. So for me, I think that it is super crucial that I maintain phonemic vowel length, and I will try to do so. All right, so now we're going to go into these diphthongs. So this has been the tendency that I have already, even before I read this document, been choosing to do so based upon my own understanding. The diphthongs I and oi have become something more like I and o. I find when I pronounce this diphthong, I tend to unround this final vowel and have it sound more like E. So something more like U, U. This definitely, a very sort of like lazy I, which easily transitions. It's sort of on the way, as he notes here, to E, which happens eventually because this digraph is pronounced A in modern Greek, at least to my understanding. And this digraph is pronounced E because this goes through this sort of feature where this transitions to U, and then U unrounds it to become E. So, korai, 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 and ömu, ömu. Cool. And then he notes, you may prefer to evolve both these digraphs into monophthongs. If you desire this, my pedagogical recommendation is for I to be a and o, e to be which I do maybe occasionally without thinking about it. For example, moi, I might pronounce m, especially when reading or reciting quickly. Prior to 1st century BC, ancient Greek had long diphthongs marked by iota subscript, but these merged with the plain long monophthong vowels. So I became a, and a became a, and oi became o. I have been adding sort of a hint of the iota subscript, or the iota, I don't know what you call that, the long diphthong. It's a long diphthong. I have been using the long diphthong just because as a learner I find that to be useful. I don't know if this is anachronistic for the time period entirely for a high register sort of archaicizing accent, but I've been doing it. It makes it easier for me to learn spelling, makes it easier to learn grammar. Again, it's a convention that I think has utility for me as a learner. So this, I would be pronouncing something like aido, aido. And this would be something like leestes, leestes, and como hoy día, como hoy día, como hoy día, como hoy día. Oh man, it's hard with all those long vowels, huh? Como hoy día, como hoy día. Basically, I'm trying to mostly pronounce this with like a little flavor of an E at the end. Okay. So, as in modern Greek, sigma and zeta are retracted. That I've never had an issue with. I have no problem pronouncing a retracted S. It's actually one of my favorite sounds. I love it. I love a good jazz singer S. So let's see what this word is. I don't know this word, but it looks like it is shikizo, shikizo, shikizo. And zeteo, zetis, zetis. He notes that zeta should be geminated, and this is because, of course, it either represents the affricate zda or dza, and then it deaffricated and just became a fricative, and retained some gemination as a sort of placeholder for the former consonant length, or for the full consonant length of the affricate. I suspect that at the beginning of a word, that might not have been so commonly geminated, just because that's a little bit less natural, at least for me. I will mostly tend to pronounce it as a geminate post-vocalically, when it's coming in a position where gemination is a little bit easier to deal with. In Arabic, which I speak, there is productive gemination in modern dialects of Arabic as well, very common. However, I will say that in positions where there has been a loss of a final vowel, for example, the word for uncle is ammi, my uncle. Technically, in classical Arabic, that word would have been ammun, with a geminated mim. But actually what happens is that most people in speech will reduce the length of that because it comes at the end of the word, right? If there's no vowel at the end, yeah, you can really hold it out and emphasize it if you want. However, for the most part, especially in rapid speech, it's going to kind of simplify to a single consonant. So even in a language where there's productive gemination just regularly all the time, and by productive I do mean productive, like when words are brought in from other languages into colloquial Arabic, they will be given gemination when it makes sense for grammatical purposes. So it's a very, very practiced active form of the language. It's not something on the way out like it happened in Hebrew. In situations where gemination might be, I don't know, tend to disappear, it would disappear. So for me, I would be saying zetis, zetish. But if the word that came before this, or if it's in a post-vocalic position, I'm probably more likely to keep the gemination, shikizo, shikizo. We'll see how well I can stick to that. Okay, next. The letters delta and theta are dental fricatives as in modern Greek. Okay, so this is fun. So this, we should be using modern Greek values according to this main convention. So this would be vidomi, vidomi, and then this word would be philo, philo. However, one thing is the case that is, again, from what I understand, in Greco-Roman Egypt, the voiceless stops were maintained as aspirates for much longer. So I will be saying telo, telo, and not phelo. In the case of this, my understanding for the voiced stops is that the first one to go is gamma, where gamma goes to ramma. And ramma is a word that's really hard is a sound that's really hard for me to let go of because it's just such a beautiful sound. It provides such a smooth texture to speech. And after that, maybe you get beta going to v by labial fricative, veta, and then maybe from there you get to finally to the v sound, right? And then the last one to go is delta to velta. I am definitely using ramma all the time. Ramma all the time, except in sort of a post-nasal situation where it probably makes it hardened, right? Or makes it more plosive. In the case of the other ones, I like to adopt a convention, which I actually found he discusses later, so we'll get to it. I like to adopt a convention where geminated, or at the beginning of the word, which are places that often in languages where we have a lenition or a change of a stop to a fricative or even an approximant, that tends to block it. For famously, when all of the plosives became lenited in Hebrew due to what is believed as Aramaic influence to fricatives, this occurred conditionally as an allophone in intervocalic contexts, but was blocked at the beginning of an utterance or a word, as well as when geminated. I suspect that before these became fully spirants all the time, that was probably also the case here. So for me, I'm going to say didomi, didomi. It seems very natural. I also speak Spanish, and in Spanish this happens all the time, right? In Spanish, for example, the equivalent of the verb didomi is the verb dar, or doy, which means I give, right? But then when it comes post-vocalically or intervocalically, you end up with this almost approximant, I would say, but potentially fricative for some speakers. For example, the word for city, which is ciudad, ciudad, or ciudad in Iberian Spanish, where you have the softening sort of intervocalically. So for me, that feels very natural. It feels like something that speakers were probably apt to do, and it's probably how we ended up with the fricatives. So for me, it will be didomi, didomi, and telo, telo. Again, it's a convention that I'm sticking to. You can sound off if you don't like it, but I kind of like it. Okay, so again, we're going to use letters gamma and chi as they are in modern Greek. So it's ramma and chi, ra and cha for in front of back vowels versus ch in front of front vowels. So these are the backed versions of these, or the versions of these consonants before back vowels. So he has galatea, galatea, and raubros, ronis, and run. That's the convention that I'm going to use because I do love this sound. Also, it is my understanding that this was the first to go among the voiced stops, the first to spirantize. This, again, would be chame, chawon, chortos, and echusin. But I'm actually going to say chame, chawon, chortos, and echusin with a aspirated k sound. Because again, my understanding is that in Greco-Roman Egypt, the aspirated voiceless stops remained aspirated for a long period of time. Okay, so this for me would be galatea, galatea, gauros, ronis, and run. And kame, kawon, kortos, ekusin. So that's what I'm doing. Seems reasonable to me. Now, in front of front vowels, the gamma changes to a y sound, which is a palatal fricative. So the word for earth, which is ye, yeya, yeuma, yilosh, yo, yups, something like that. I think I'm doing okay with that. That's a good sound. I love that sound. That's also a very fun sound. He notes here is really fun to pronounce, and listen, I agree. Yilosh, that's fun. It just got this extra like buzz to it. That's really fun. Okay, this I'm not doing. This would be hirsin, echis, here, chiros, tachi. I'm not doing that. I'm doing kersin, echis, kere, chiros, and tachi. Kere. Is that how I say it? Kere. I think so. Yeah, is that how I'm saying hello when I come to class? I think so. This is an interesting point. So the palatalization that occurs for kappa, the unaspirated k sound before front vowels. This is suggesting that this is not as much as like a palatalized glide on the k sound. So instead of genos, this implies that it's actually a palatal stop. So it's genos. Maybe that's true. Gemenos, cheros, kune, kuna. Maybe. I wonder. I've listened to a lot of modern Greek, although I don't speak it. I don't know if I hear that. Maybe I hear kenos, kimenos, keros, kune, kina. I'm not sure. But I'm going to tend to maybe not palatalize it as much. I don't know how consistently or well I can do that, especially without it turning into what something sounds like an aspirated stop. We'll see. Kenos, kimenos, keros, kune, kina. That sounds like what I'm probably going to do. We'll see. TBD on this one. Let's see how well I do that and what comes most naturally to me. So in other languages that have a palatalized or a palatal stop, like for example, you hear it very prominently in the southern Saigon dialect of Vietnamese. The word for older sister is ye. You hear it really strongly there. This contrasts to the affricate that is found in Hanoi Vietnamese and Northern Vietnamese. For the same word in Southern Vietnamese is ye, but in Northern Vietnamese is chi. So it's become fully an affricate, which is something that sometimes happens to these palatal stops. Yeah, we'll see. This one's a little bit more challenging for me, but we'll see how that goes. The letter gamma is used for the velar and palatal nasal. So this is the set of consonants gamma kappa, which is going to be pronounced ankalos, ananki. And again, I don't know, ananki. For me, there might be less palatalization. Ankalos, ananke. Yeah. And then we have ng, so angarea. Yeah. And then this allegedly should be something like angelos. We'll see how well I do that. Angelos. Yeah, we'll see how well I can consistently do that. So according to this, across words, this should also hold. So that sort of suggests that this should be tongamon. Instead of tongamon. I'm not sure. Ten yenesin. Yeah, we'll see how well I can consistently sort of reproduce this. These are pretty easy. These letters sounded pretty much as expected. These are the unaspirated stops. So we have tetara, and then we have papos, and we have lalle, and mamia, and nanne, and then of course the flap ara, or the trill erosto, erostho, erostho. Yeah. And then continuing on, we have the bilabials. So again, I'm going to be using, instead of saying fi, he suggests the bilabial fricative fi, philosophos, which is nice. But again, the understanding that I have is that in Greco-Roman Egypt, the aspirated plosives were retained, and so this should be philosophos, philosophos. And I'm going to take the same convention that I took with the delta for the beta, which is to keep it a plosive in initial and in geminated positions, but to allow it, or in consonant clusters like this, but to allow it to weaken intervocalically or postvocalically in some form, like biblia, biblia. I think, oh, excuse me, this is the plural, so this is not long, and of course it's not marked as long, so it doesn't have a micron on it. So biblia, biblia. Right. So let's see what he says here. For standard Lucian, I recommend fricatives everywhere, except after nasals. Okay, sure. Andra, that makes sense. Again, I'm going to take sort of the position that I've taken already, that ramma is the first to go, so that's going to be a fricative no matter what, and that these are a little bit conditioned on context. And this is actually what I was saying before. So he notes, while standard Lucian generalizes the fricative, it is entirely possible that these letters acted more like their equivalents in modern Spanish for some speakers. It's really funny that this says this here, because I sort of came to this conclusion independently, and then I saw this and I was like, oh, yeah, of course. Rendered as the approximants ga, da, wa in most positions, but as the occlusives ga, da, ba at the beginning of an utterance or after hiatus, as well as after nasals. If you're a Spanish speaker and you're comfortable with the system, I regard it as a legitimate variant of the Lucian pronunciation. Well, thank you so much. Okay, finally we have two false diphthongs. These consist of a vowel followed by a bilabial fricative. I am under the impression that in Greco-Roman Egypt, this actually did stay au, and this actually does stay eu. So this would be aurion and autos, and this would be eugenia and eutropos, eutropos. I have a tendency, because of course I'm familiar with modern Greek pronunciation, I have a tendency to do something kind of like this and have au, au, where there's a very slight noise, aurion, autos, rather than aurion, autos, and eugenia, eugenia, instead of eugenia, eugenia, eutropos, eutropos, a very slight amount of noise there. But my understanding is that in Greco-Roman Egypt, the the eu, au was still in full effect. Cool. I'm not going to go into all of the detail of pronouncing bilabial fricatives. They aren't that hard. This happens in Japanese. The Japanese hu, which we write with the letter F in transliteration, is actually bilabial fricative like this, which is why it sometimes is confused with hu. Okay, let's see what else we got. Oh, and that's pretty much it. So then he has some recommendations on choosing a variant. I've already sort of given my decisions on what I'm choosing and why. It's sort of a mixture of things that I've understood to be the case for Greco-Roman Egypt, which is basically maintenance of the voiceless aspirates, as that's really the main thing. I am, however, choosing to keep vowel length, phonemic vowel length, as well as pitch accent. I'm keeping pitch accent, even though it is likely that this had collapsed in probably speech. I don't know, maybe not. I think the book is still out, but a lot of people that I see online say that Greco-Roman Egyptian Koine did not have pitch accent and had stress accent. But listen, maybe it did. I like pitch accent. I don't have problems with pitch accent. I think that it's nice, especially as a learner, for knowing how to accent and spell words. This is the same reason why I'm keeping initial aspiration, rough breathing, aka rough breathing, for the same reason. It kind of enables me to know how to spell words. It enables me to learn grammar. It's a really great aid for the learner. Yeah, so here's some examples of pitch accent. So, for example, this word, nomos, nomos, elegon, elegon, tigater, tigater, patrosmu, 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 where this is an enclitic, doesn't get an accent. This essentially functions as a 3-syllable word with the pitch rising on the second syllable. Do, 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 do. So let's look at this sentence. Que alla prova taiko, hau gestin ektes aules tautes. That's my best rendition right now, just cold. And this is trying to point out that he thinks here that ancient sheet music tends to show something much like a combination of Japanese and Mono Greek, a downtrending. So you start higher pitch and you sort of move down. So rather than very sort of artificially going, que alla provata echo, au gestin ektes aules tautes, is to do something more like, que alla provata echo, hau gestin ektes aules tautes, where you sort of go from high to low. Que alla provata echo, au gestin ektes aules tautes. I think I did a pretty good job. I don't know. Great. Yeah, in conclusion, this is great. And it also sounds really natural and isn't like a lot of other conventions that have been used for ancient Greek that I find a little dissonant and not so great. Certainly are dissonant, I know for a fact, to modern Greek speakers who famously dislike how Westerners, Western Europeans, and Americans, etc., have typically pronounced the ancient versions of their language. So yeah, that's me sort of walking through that guide and outlining the conventions that I plan on using in my own speech. So, to review. Okay, so on this slide I'm reviewing the phonological conventions I'm making for Koine Greek as a learner. And if you like them, let me know. If you don't like them, leave your comments or corrections, thoughts, feelings, etc. in the comments. I'm not listing every single consonant sound here, obviously. Mostly the ones where something may differ from the main document or something that sounds very specific to the way the Greek, I think, could be pronounced in the place and time that I'm interested in. Anyway, let's go through it. So plosives, we have the voiceless, unaspirated plosives first. That's easy. That's pataka, pataka, pitiki, pitiki, putuku, putuku, pataka. And then if I can, let's see, I didn't do it when I just did that little example pronunciation, but let's see how well I can reproduce a palatalized stop without it getting too much noise, sounding aspirated or affricated. Kya, 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 ki, 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 kye, 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 kyu, kyu, kyu. Let's see how well I can do that. And then we have the aspirated stops, which again, I'm not making into fricatives, but maintaining as aspirated stops. So we have pataka, pitiki, putuku. Sometimes I'll allow these to kind of veer into affricated territory, like pa, ta, ka, ka. I like ka to be extra noisy sometimes, just because the velar stop in general can sometimes be a little bit more prone to sounding aspirated. So I tend to give this one a little more like almost like a ch ending to it, but it's still very much a plosive. And then the unvoiced, or excuse me, the voiced stops are a little bit conditional on context. And so we have ba ba ba, ba ba ba, and awa awa, iwi iwi, da da da, di di di, but ada ada ada, idi idi idi, and ra ra ra, but post nasal or in hiatus, anga anga, ongo. And then ya, or excuse me, ye, yi, yu in front of front vowels. I mean, obviously I can do it in front of a back vowel too, but that's not the condition we're using. Yi, yi, yu, yu. And then in hiatus, we have something like anya, inyi, inye, inye, angelos, things like that. And some other contents of note, we have obviously retracted forms of the sigma and the zeta. So we have sa sa sa, but voiced in front of plosive voiced, maybe any voice thing, not just a plosive, thinking about it. A voiced consonant that comes after this would probably spread the voicing. So isma, zma, zmos, anything with those sorts of endings probably would get voiced, right? And then this should be geminated, but I think I'm going to end up mostly geminating it intervocalically or in places where gemination is a little easier. I'm not sure. Let's see how well I can geminate this. It's just the beginning of a word. That's a little bit challenging, I think. But so that would be za 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 zi 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 zu zu zu, but then azza, eze, easy, things like that. I don't know what the thought is on whether or not the rho at the beginning of a word should be voiceless in the Koine period or not. That would imply ra, ri, ru versus ra, ri, ru. I'm not sure what the word is. I'm going to tend to do this just because typically in text you see that rough breathing mark on top of the row in those contexts. And then doubled, we have arra, re, iri. Maybe these should be voiceless. Maybe it should be arra, r, re, ri, something like that. And then I am using initial aspiration, as well as I'm going to try to use word internal aspiration, although it may not always be clear to me as a learner because it's not always written orthographically. But that would be like hema for blood and vihoti for because. And then with the monophthongs, a, e, I, o, u. And then long variants, a, or not variants, but the long vowel phonemes, a, e, and e, but this conditionally a in front of a vowel, u, and o, and u. And then the diphthongs I and ö, and then au and eu, and I, a, oi, oi. And I'm allowing this part to be a little bit short. We will see if I make it too long, like approaching too classic, that's that the rest of the sounds are an anachronism. If I say oi, a, I, we'll see how well I can keep that. But yeah, those are my conventions, and that's what I'm going to try to use. So let me know what you think about that. So that is all I have for this kind of long video. But that is me walking through my process of picking a pronunciation convention. And now I am looking forward to really diving in and doing some readings and things that I'm preparing for class. And hopefully, eventually, once I gain enough confidence and enough vocabulary, etc., be able to do some full-on just talking at the camera about various topics in Koine Greek, in ancient Greek. Let's see how this goes. Wish me luck.